Hello, and welcome to the Common Hour. My name is Rachel Anderson Rayburn, and I'm an Associate Professor of Theater and co-chair of the Common Hour Committee, along with our chair, Justin Hopkins. I'd like to introduce our ASL interpreter, Emily Phipps. Thank you, Emily, for interpreting for us at Common Hour. Please note that if you need to change your screen view to include Emily as you watch, you can adjust the screen display mode in the small box labeled View towards the upper right of the Zoom window. Please enable the CC closed captioning for the video if you need it. We are very happy that all of you are here with us. The Common Hour is a unique and inclusive program that brings the Franklin and Marshall community together weekly during the academic year for culturally and intellectually enriching events. It is the only regularly scheduled event that unites students, faculty, and staff, and invites the larger community to join us. Throughout this pandemic, the Common Hour continues to provide a gathering space and a source of inspiration, education, and compelling discussion for the F&M community and beyond. Please follow the Common Hour on our webpage, the Presence Calendar, and our F&M Common Hour Facebook and Instagram pages. Next week's Common Hour is entitled The Anti-Racist Writing Workshop, How to Decolonize the Creative Classroom, presented by Felicia Rose Chavez, author and creativity and innovation scholar in residence at Colorado College. During today's event, Zoom viewers can submit questions for our speaker via the Q&A feature. Please identify yourself as an FPS member or a student. We won't use anyone's names. Today's Q&A will be moderated by Dr. Gretchen Hathaway, F&M's Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And now I would like to introduce the proposer of today's event, Joe Pritchett, Director of Faith and Meaning.
Good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Joe Pritchett, and I'm the Director for Faith and Meaning and the Interim Dean here for Ware College House. Before I introduce our speaker, I also have to extend my gratitude to Dr. Gretchen Hathaway, Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, as her office is also sponsoring this event. I'm really excited to be here with all of you in this virtual space in order to introduce Dr. Eboo Patel. Eboo Patel is the founder of Interfaith Youth Core, based in Chicago, Illinois. He attended the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign for his undergraduate studies in sociology, and he earned a doctorate in the sociology of religion from Oxford University, where he studied on a Rhodes scholarship. Dr. Patel founded Interfaith Youth Core on the idea that religion should be a bridge of cooperation rather than a barrier of division. He is inspired to build this bridge by his identity as an American Muslim navigating a religiously diverse social landscape. For over 15 years, he has worked with governments, social sector organizations, and college and university campuses like our own to help make interfaith cooperation a social norm. Named by US News and World Report as one of America's best leaders in 2009, Eboo served on President Obama's Inaugural Faith Council and is the author of many books, including Acts of Faith, Sacred Ground, Interfaith Leadership, a Primer, and Out of Many Faiths, Religious Diversity and the American Promise. Eboo spends most of his time on the road and in virtual spaces like this, meeting students, educators, and community leaders to talk about the complex landscape of religious diversity and the power of interfaith cooperation in the 21st century. And with that, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Eboo Patel.
Thank you, Joe. I am very happy to be with you at Franklin and Marshall College today. I've got good friends there, people who I admire a great deal, like Joe and Gretchen. And I know this is a sensitive and important moment for your campus. I have been made aware of the racist, bigoted, anti-Semitic events that have taken place recently and some of the conversation around that. The first thing I want to offer is my sorrow and my solidarity with you as you go through this. If I was on campus, I would be better positioned to speak into the moment, into the specifics of the situation. But given the limitations of this era, I'm not able to do that. So what I wanted to do was to use this time to perhaps offer a broader frame on moments of pain, which can also be moments of change. And I think that when we talk of pain and change, we should talk of the short, the medium, and the long term. And you have exceptional campus professionals with you, faculty and staff, people like Gretchen and Joe and others at Franklin and Marshall who can guide you through all of those phases. I'm going to focus for my presentation on the long term. So this is not principally about the hours and the days what to do with in the next hours or days about the wounds that have taken place. It's the decades. It's the time ahead. Metaphorically, I like to call it the day after the day after. What kind of a social change agent are you over the decades? What kind of social order would you like to build? That's the focus of my presentation. And I hope that it is both relevant to this moment, perhaps in an adjacent type of way, but also it is inspiring for the future, for who you see yourself being in the years and decades ahead. So with that, I'll ask my friend and colleague Terry to put up my first slides here, and we'll get underway. I'm calling this talk, "We Need to Build Field Notes for Diverse Democracy." And I want to begin with an image of one of the great heroes of the civil rights movement. This is Bob Moses, who sadly passed away just a few months ago. Bob Moses was a lion of what you might call the third founding of the United States of America in the middle of the 20th century. He was the principal organizer of Freedom Summer. He was one of the leaders of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He was the co-director of COFO, the Council of Federated Organizations. Civil rights movement it's impossible to overstate his influence and how his ethos affects the movement. And some of my favorite stories about Bob Moses is that he would picket outside of grocery stores in segregated schools alone. So he's from New York, but he went down to the American South in the middle part of the 20th century, and where he found an injustice, he stood up to it, sometimes alone. And I just have this powerful image of this man who you see in front of you doing that work. And here's another image of Robert Moses. This is him 30 years after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and 1965. And it's him writing about the organization that he founded called the Algebra Project. So after Bob Moses helps bring down legalized segregation, there's other forms of segregation that still exist. I'm calling this legalized segregation. After he brings it down in the Jim Crow South, he moves to Cambridge, Massachusetts. He enters a PhD program at Harvard, and his daughter, African-American daughter, is in middle school. And Bob Moses notes that poorer Black kids in Boston middle schools at the time are shunted into lower level math courses. They wind up taking algebra years later, which effectively relegates them to second class economic status in their lives. And he wants to create a better way of teaching math to minority kids. And he calls this civil rights work. He calls this part of the same movement that he was a part of in the mid-1960s. And I want you to just pause and think about that for a second, right? I want you to consider what somebody might have said to Bob Moses as he said, "I'm the civil rights leader who's created something called the Algebra Project, which teaches math to poor minority kids in better and more effective ways." You look at Bob Moses and say, you helped bring down Jim Crow segregation in the American South. You organized Freedom Summer, and then you became a middle school math teacher, and you say these are the same kinds of work, two sides of the same coin. But there's great wisdom in this, right? Bob Moses's principal role was not to bring down the things he didn't like. It was to build the things that he did. And one of the things that the most important thing he wanted to build was full enfranchisement and citizenship for all people in the United States. Sometimes it means opposing evil. Sometimes it means building something better. That's really the heart of my talk today. What does it mean to be the kind of person who over the course of time has the vision, knowledge, and skills to build something better? Next slide. So the piece of art, which I think gets to this the best, is Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton, right? And here is Lin-Manuel Miranda playing Hamilton, and he has just come out of his young, scrappy, and hungry phase where he tore down the colonial power in the Revolutionary War. He and his compadres defeated this mighty empire, and he feels just elated and victorious. And his mentor and patron, George Washington, says, winning is easy, governing is harder. And it's a powerful moment, right? You consider, wait a second, we just did what has never been done. We're this ragtag army that defeated a mighty empire. And George Washington saying, our work has just begun, because the ultimate goal is not to just defeat the things you don't like. It is to build the things you do. And actually, that is much more challenging. Consider, it is easier to make a group of people angry at an injustice. Important as that is, it is easier to make a group of people angry at an injustice than it is to organize a fair trial. But a decent society needs to have fair trials ongoing all the time in all places. It is easier to tell a school that it is racist than to build a model of education in which people of a variety of races achieve somewhat equally. It is easier to say that those people are doing it wrong than to create a model of doing it right. But over the course of time, it is not enough to just get rid of the things we don't like. You have to be the kind of social change agent that can build the things you do. What does it look like to be the architect of a better society, not just the opposer of the things that make a society a place you don't want to live? So in the next slide, I want to show you the person who helped me think this way. So Michelle Alexander, the great Michelle Alexander, who wrote the book, The New Jim Crow, and just is amongst the most important people in anti-racist movements of our time. She wrote a column not long after the 2016 election in which she cast something of a different light on the resistance. And she said, listen, I understand why there's opposition to the current regime, but I don't think opposition's enough, because at some point you have to have a vision for what you want to build, and you have to have the ability to build those things, right? And so this was kind of a stop in your tracks moment, at least for me. And part of what I would invite you to do is, what is your stop in your tracks moment where you think to yourself, oh boy, I need to think about this differently. It's not that what I'm thinking is wrong, it's just too limited. I don't want to think of myself principally as an opponent of something. I want to think of myself as a purveyor of something, as a builder of something. So Michelle Alexander's proposal is we think of ourselves as cultivators of the river of human freedom. And she cites some of her heroes, who happen to be my heroes as well, Vincent Harding, Langston Hughes, as the people who spoke of the rivers of human freedom. Vincent Harding was somebody that I knew, another lion of the civil rights movement. And there's something that he would say, actually said it to me personally once. He said, I live in a nation that does not yet exist, but I believe in it. That's powerful, right? I live in a nation that does not yet exist, right? But I believe in its ideals, and I'm working to build its institutions. If you were to describe that nation, or that campus, or that city of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, what would those ideals be? And how would you build the institutions that instantiated those ideals? What knowledge and skills would you need to have? Honestly, I think that that's what college is about. I think college is a place where you learn and you have the opportunity to articulate a set of ideals for your campus, for your city, for your nation, for the world, where you begin to think rigorously about what are the institutions that help this society live up to those ideals. What does public safety look like? What does education look like? What does architecture look like? What do cities look like? And then you develop the vision, the knowledge, and the skills to actually build those institutions. It is much easier to tell somebody that they're doing something wrong than it is to build a better version of that. And I invite you to consider, what does it look like to be the kind of person building a better version? We go to the next slide. This is Deepa Iyer, who well-known activist and author, who has, I think, this great model of the social change ecosystem map and the recognition that people play different roles in it, right? If we're looking for a society in which the chief ideals and values are equity, liberation, justice, solidarity, what are the kinds of social change agents we need to be to build that society? And Deepa Iyer says, actually, there's different roles to play. Certainly disruptors, people who say stop in the evil systems of whatever might be evil in the current society. But most of these roles, it strikes me, are kind of positive roles. They're forward-thinking roles, right? There's healers, there's guides, there's storytellers, there's visionaries, there's builders. I'm focusing here on the builder and the visionary, if you will. But part of what I am struck by is in people who have thought a great deal about social change, so much of what they focus on is positive energy. And what does it look like to build something better? Not to hate something more, but to build something better. Che Guevara once said, the true revolutionary is motivated by great quantities of love. You know, Dorothy Day, who probably is my, certainly in the top 5 of my pantheon of social change heroes, she's motivated by love. And it's a love that comes from her particular belief in God. And I'll be speaking about religion more later, but in your circles, as you discuss how you address the situation that has confronted you right now, and as you consider the kind of person you want to be in the years and decades to come, which of these roles feels right? And you can change, over the course of your life, certainly, but even over the course of a week, you can change. But it's really interesting to kind of ask yourself, where do I feel like I fit? It's been helpful for me. Next slide. So, I speak of Dorothy Day as in the kind of, on my Mount Rushmore, so to speak, of social change heroes. I would say if I had to choose one in American history, if I could only have one social change hero, it would be Jane Addams. And the reason that I love Jane Addams so much is because she is a civic leader who made profound political changes. And what I mean by civic leader is that what she principally did was build models of something better. What she principally did was build models of something better. And then she used that model, the credibility based on building that model, to advocate for change in the rest of the society. So let me give you an example. So Jane Addams, she's in her late 20s when she constructs Hull House. She thinks of it as her contribution to constructing the world anew and conforming it to her own ideals. Hull House is about 6 miles south of where I sit right now. It's on the near west side of Chicago, where the campus of the University of Illinois at Chicago is. I make a regular pilgrimage there. I want to be around the place that, it's a museum now, but I want to be around the place that Jane Addams built. So when Jane Addams moves there in the late 19th, early 20th century, it's a time of massive immigration to American society. It's a time of of mass urbanization. There are deep problems of racism and sexism and sanitation and workers' conditions. And what she does is to say, for every problem we see, we're going to build a model solution. So she and the group of women, and it was virtually all women who lead Hull House, they do a survey of the local neighborhood, and they find that there are 7,000 school-age children, but there's only 3,000 seats in the local schools. So what do? They start classrooms. They say, we're going to build a solution here, right? There are huge problems with public health and sanitation. People are literally dying of sanitation issues in late 19th century Chicago and other cities around the country. So what do Jane Addams and Ellen Starr and the women of Hull House do? They build public baths. There's a huge problem in that the only place for socializing around the city is saloons. And when that's the only place of socializing, a bunch of bad things can happen. So Jane Addams and Ellen Starr and her crew build coffee houses as a model. And then they advocate for those kinds of changes across society. The kinds of things that Jane Addams was involved in, it's unbelievable. Walter Isaacson once said of Steve Jobs of Apple, he transformed 7 areas of American business. Well, Jane Addams transformed at least as many areas of American democracy. She's involved in the founding of the NAACP. She's a key leader in the movement for women's suffrage. She is a founder of the Women's International League of Peace and Freedom, which opposes World War I. She's a key leader in the ACLU. She joins Ida B. Wells Barnett, the great African-American female journalist and suffragette and anti-lynching campaigner in her crusade against lynching. She helps to found an academic field, urban sociology. The thing that I love about Jane Addams, I will say it again, is she sees problems in the society around her. She builds solutions, concrete, actual solutions. Here's how to do this better. And then she says, let's spread these solutions across the nation and the world. And it works. And so I invite you to consider a Jane Addams approach. What does it look like to see a problem, to build a solution, a concrete solution, and then to invite other people to do the same, to spread that solution, better ways of doing better to others. So part of what we need to talk about in social change is what do you do when you are faced with something so evil that it provokes a stark, extreme reaction in you? And that's in many ways the story of James Baldwin in The Fire Next Time. And that's on the next slide here. And I just want to tell you the story of The Fire Next Time. It's one of my favorite books. I would commend it to all of you. And perhaps you're experiencing a moment that is similar to what Baldwin experienced actually for much of his life. He is Black, he's gay in the middle of the latter half of the 20th century in the United States. Very challenging position to be in. And in the mid-1960s, in the early 1960s, Baldwin is feeling especially despondent, especially angry. He's not served in restaurants. His sexuality is constantly marginalized. And he goes through a period where he feels violent in response. And in this period, he receives an invitation from Elijah Muhammad, at that point, the leader of the Nation of Islam. And Elijah Muhammad invites him to dinner in his home in the south side of Chicago. And again, I want to just say this story is chronicled in The Fire Next Time, which is widely understood as one of the great works of nonfiction of the latter part of the 20th century. And Baldwin tells the story in the book of going to Elijah Muhammad's house in the south side of Chicago. He understands Elijah Muhammad's anger. He wants to connect with it. He wants to share his own. But the longer he spends at this dinner, the more uncomfortable he feels. Men and women are separated and they're not equal. There are Muslim environments I've been in where men and women are separated for modesty reasons, and it doesn't feel terrible. Well, for James Baldwin in that moment, it didn't feel equal. And it felt like Elijah Muhammad had kind of cult leader, kind of dictatorial powers. He would say something and everybody would nod in agreement. Literally anything he pronounced, people would just agree with. And some of the things he said, James Baldwin wasn't that happy with. All white people were devils. We need to save all Black people from the white devils. We need to build a separate society. Black people who are friends with white people are deluding themselves. And Baldwin is thinking to himself, boy, after this dinner, I'm going to have a drink with a white friend. And I'm certainly not comfortable sharing that here. And over the course of this dinner, Baldwin comes to the conclusion, he writes about this beautifully, he understands Elijah Muhammad's anger, but he doesn't want to live in Elijah Muhammad's world. I want you to reflect on that for a moment, right? What does it mean to understand the anger, but not want to live in that world? And ultimately, you have to live in a world. And Baldwin faces that, right? He doesn't end with, I understand the anger, but I want to live in the world. He ends with, okay, so then what do you do? And he says, what I have is America, right? And I need to reconstruct my relationship with this country. And towards the end, he's got these just remarkable lines in American and Black and global literature. He says, I don't want to see myself only as someone who came to this nation in chains. I am not a ward of this state, is his line. I am one of the first Americans to arrive on these shores. He shifts the paradigm, right? I'm one of the first Americans to arrive on these shores. And I believe we have an opportunity, he says later, to achieve our country and change the history of the world. If I understand your anger, but don't want to live in your world, I need to think of the world that I do want to live in. And I need to take some responsibility for building that. And in order for me to do that, I might need to shift my perception of who I am. I am an agent, an architect, somebody who builds. That's the process that Baldwin kind of articulates in this book. It's this beautifully written inner journey of a social change agent that he leads us through. It's useful, I think, to spend a little bit more time with anger. And I want to go to the next slide. And I want to highlight an insight that the great Howard Thurman had about anger, right? And I'm not here to tell you that anger is illegitimate or wrong. You know, I loved the first part of The Fire Next Time where Baldwin writes about connecting with Elijah Muhammad's anger and understanding his own. But I think it's useful for us to reflect on anger as a strategy for social change and the limits of it. And Howard Thurman, who I think is one of the great social change agents of the 20th century, is a spiritual figure. He says, the problem with rage is that it almost always burns down more than its intended target. Now, sometimes it only burns down its intended target, but I have to say, in my, 25 plus years as somebody who's been involved in social change, started first in college, and now, alhamdulillah, I get paid for my work in social change as the founder and president of IFYC. I have found that this is almost always the case, that rage almost always burns down more than its intended target. It is probably true that forests need a controlled burn for regeneration. I have never achieved the control of my rage, my fire of anger. It's only always burned way more than I intended it to, including first and foremost my insides. And I just think at an institution like a campus, it is useful to reflect on what might be very natural emotions and responses. Part of what we do on campuses is reflect, right? And this is Howard Thurman's reflection on rage. And actually, this next image you see here that's for fans of Game of Thrones, that's Daenerys Targaryen and one of her dragons. And actually, I think that the story of Daenerys Targaryen in Game of Thrones is a powerful illustration of Howard Thurman's point. So Daenerys is a social justice agent, and she cannot stand oppression. And she has this powerful force with her. She's got dragons that breathe fire, and nobody has dragons. And so what she does is she goes city to city, burning down structures of oppression, literally, right? She burns the slaveholders. But she realizes something over the course of doing this. Again, city after city. I think there were like 8 seasons or 10 seasons to Game of Thrones. There was a lot of burning that was going on. Daenerys Targaryen realizes her dragons, however useful they are for burning slaveholders, they can't tell the difference between a slaveholder and a farmer. So when she burns down the oppressive structures and actually becomes the equivalent of mayor of the city, her dragons just burn things. They burn the fields, they burn the farms, and they burn the freed slaves and the former slaveholders. She can't control them. And I think that more instructively, she can't control herself. She becomes so accustomed to burning things that when she finally wins, when she triumphs, when she sits upon the Iron Throne and she's the Lord Protector of the land and the ruler of the 7 kingdoms, her first line isn't, now let my reign of peace and prosperity begin. This is what I've been longing for these many years. This is why all of the destruction I've left, because I wanted to build peace and prosperity. Instead, she sits upon the Iron Throne and says to her senior advisors, let's go find more things to burn. Let's go to the ends of the universe to find more things to burn. It's all she knows how to do. I have to tell you, I've met more than one activist like this. It's all they know how to do. And I just think it's useful to reflect upon, right? It's the lesson of Robert Moses. It's the lesson George Washington was teaching Alexander Hamilton. When you win, do you know what to do? When the structures of oppression fall and the school is no longer legally segregated, can you teach math better? When you vanquish the British Empire, can you build the society that you want? It's harder to organize a free trial than it is to get people to chant slogans in the street. This is not dismissing the importance of slogans in the street. What happens when you win? One of my favorite lines by Frederick Douglass: power gives nothing without a struggle. Maybe one of your favorite lines too. Interesting to ask. When you struggle and you win, what do you do? When you're the one in charge, when you're the one with power, what do you do? So that question was actually asked to me, if we go to the next slide, in a really personal way. So you might have guessed, I speak from some experience here. I was a fire-breathing dragon for the earlier part of my work as a social change agent and activist. Lots of things wrong in the world, and I thought it was my responsibility to find them and point them out. And I was not shy about it. I was really loud about it. I was really in your face about it. And as I got more and more involved in something called interfaith work, which I hope you consider getting involved in also, Gretchen and Joe are some of the most important leaders in higher ed in the movement for interfaith cooperation. So as I got more and more involved in this work in the late 1990s, I would go to interfaith conferences and I would point out all the things that the leaders of those organizations were doing wrong. This conference is too white. The people are too old. It's too boring. You know, interfaith work should be about social change. It should be edgy. There should be young people. There should be racial equity. There should be a broader kind of religious diversity. I was like, stood up in the middle of conferences, raised my fist and pointed my fingers. I was a disruptor. And this woman named Yolan Trevino, happens to be an indigenous Mayan woman. She comes up to me at a conference in June of 1998. It's a conference at Stanford. And she says to me, you know, what you're saying, it's powerful. Interfaith work that would center young people and social change and social action and racial equity, it would be more edgy. You should build that. So, you know, that's like the first day of my second life, you might say, because honestly, nobody had ever really challenged me that way before. right? They had either only been cowed by my critique or encouraged my critique, but mostly they were relating to me as a critic. Yolan shifted the paradigm on me. She said, you're articulating a powerful vision. Do you have the skills to build it? Because you should. Because you could go to conference after conference and tell people what they were doing wrong. But wouldn't it be great if you had your own conferences, had your own trainings, wrote your own books, created your own curricular materials? And that's like a real dig deep moment, right? Because honestly, I didn't have the skills to build, but I needed to admit that to myself, and I needed to in some way start over, right? It's one thing to defeat an empire, it's another thing to build a society. And part of what I found was that there's actually wonderful models in religious communities, wonderful models. And I want to go to the next slide and just say a couple things about religion here. So the thing I love about religion is at its best, it articulates a cosmic vision, and it invites people to create cathedrals on earth, if you will, to that vision, right? So in Islam, which is the tradition I'm a part of, the cosmic vision is that there's one God and God is merciful. And God will be merciful to you if you are merciful to others on earth. And we Muslims, as best we can, we try to instantiate that vision on earth. And actually, collectively, religion in America, it gets an awful lot of bad press. And that is all true, but it's only partial, because religion actually does really powerful work. Because I think it actually really attempts to live into this vision, right? You articulate a cosmic vision, you articulate a set of ideals, and then you build a set of institutions that instantiate those ideals. So look at this for a second. Over 300,000 congregations in the United States of America. By the way, that's stunning. 300,000 plus congregations. I bet you there are dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, in Lancaster. And of those 300,000 plus congregations, 130,000 of them have addiction recovery programs. 120,000 have employment training programs. Over 25,000 are involved in AIDS ministry in some way. You could just go on and on and on. By the way, you know, one of the institutions founded by a religious community, the one that's educating you, Franklin and Marshall, actually, interestingly, founded by two religious communities, by Lutherans and members of the Reformed Church. Religion at its best is institutional instantiations of cosmic ideals. And it's actually even more influential than we directly see. So this is one of my heroes. It's Brian Stevenson. He's not a pastor or a preacher, but if you listen to Brian Stevenson talk about the Equal Justice Initiative and the work that he does, he is explicit about how his religion is not only an inspiration for founding the Equal Justice Initiative, but it is actually the format for how they do their work. You know, he talks about the ritual of confession, the opportunity for forgiveness. He says, this is what nobody, the worst thing that they have done. We can't imprison people for life for the worst thing that they've done. We certainly can't be sending them to the electric chair. We need to give them an opportunity to confess, to go through the ritual of understanding their wrongdoing, and then to be redeemed. This is religious language he uses. And then to be forgiven and to become a part of the community again. You know, and Brian Stevenson is a Christian. He understands that ritual deep in his socio-religious DNA from church, but he recognizes it exists across religious institutions. And part of the reason I want to say this is that this is what I do for a living. When I work with religious diversity, this is my principal inspiration for how good work is done in the world. But I also want to say that identity and diversity is a huge conversation on most college campuses, but religious identity and diversity, not so much. Now, Franklin and Marshall is likely different because you genuinely have national leaders like Joe Pritchett and Greshel Hathaway who are national leaders in this. And so my guess is there's more talk about this. But I know that there are students there listening right now for whom your faith is a principal inspiration, or you are really curious about the social role of religion, and there isn't as much conversation about it. Sometimes it's just outright dismissed. And I want to say to you, live into it, right? Look at the good work that's done. This is not to say that bad things aren't done as well, but all of us, we're trying to live into the good. We're trying to build the good, right? We're trying to spread the bright spots. So consider the broad influence. Everything from Franklin and Marshall, built by religious communities, to the local AA meeting at a church, to the kind of influence that religion has on a man like Brian Stevenson and the institutions that he runs. And also, if we go to the next slide, consider how socially important religion and religious diversity is in the United States. This is not getting any smaller of an issue. In healthcare, in politics, in education, America's growing religious diversity, it is going to be a major issue in the years and decades to come. It's an opportunity to make a big and positive difference. Just look at this, right? The Muslim population in this country is going to double. Hindu population is going to grow by 50%. The Buddhist population by some 25%. The median age of Hindus, Muslims, and Buddhists is in the mid-30s. The median age of white Christians is in the mid-50s. We're no longer a Judeo-Christian country. We are interfaith America. We are interfaith America, and interfaith America is going to need interfaith leaders. And I invite you to think of yourself as one of them. Get involved with the interfaith programs that Joe and Gretchen and others lead on campus. Consider getting involved in the kind of work IFYC does. And I want to go to my last couple slides here. I want to highlight where my own vision comes from, right? I'm an American Muslim, an Ismaili Muslim. It's a small Shia sect of Islam. And this verse in the Quran, and I'm taking a direct English translation here. So just recognize that as you read what feels like mid-20th century language. I've not changed the English translation done by an expert. The Quran says in this translation, "O mankind, indeed, we have created you for male and female, and made you peoples and tribes, that you may know one another. Indeed, the most noble of you in the sight of Allah, of God, is the most righteous of you." That's what I've built an institution to. That is a cosmic vision. It's a cosmic vision of respect and relationship and cooperation amidst diversity. And IFYC is an institutional instantiation to that vision. I ask you again, what is your vision? Not just what are you opposed to? Who are you trying to defeat? What are you struggling against? What is your proactive, positive vision? What are your ideals? What is the river of human freedom that you are cultivating? What's the institution you are going to build to that, to make it a reality? I will end with this final sentence. I think the kind of sentiment of this entire talk. Just remember, the goal is never a more ferocious revolution. That's not the end goal. The goal is a more beautiful social order. And you at Franklin and Marshall College have an opportunity to learn how to be the architects of it. It's a powerful time for you, and I'm happy to spend these minutes with you in the nurturing of those goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Eboo, for your very wise words and a vision that you actually took to bring to fruition, to make our, not just our college campuses, but our nation a better place. So we have a few really good questions for you, my dear friend. I've missed seeing you at the conferences that we've attended, and I'm so pleased to work with Joe Pritchett. As you know, Eboo, I'm brand new on this campus. Can't say brand, but at least a year. But during the pandemic, it didn't feel like a campus. It is feeling like a campus now. And you know some of the issues that this campus is dealing with right now, right in present time, right? So the first question I have for you, you have been doing this IFYC work for almost 2 decades. What have you seen as the changes made in colleges because of IFYC based on data, because we like to look at this stuff based on data, and how has IFYC affected social justice change on college campuses?
Right, great. So that was a question from a student, Gretchen, just to be clear?
It was from me.
It's from you. Nice. Okay. So, working closely with you, not just people like you, but also you personally, Gretchen, in your position at Union, and with Joe, I think what we have done collectively is we have helped lift up religious identity and diversity as a dimension of identity and diversity that ought to be considered important. And IFYC has helped to nurture a network of 600 campuses that have some sort of rigorous, proactive interfaith program. Hundreds of them have actual courses in interfaith work. Hundreds of them have interfaith student councils or interfaith fellowship groups. There are tens of thousands of students who've gone through interfaith leadership training, typically at the Interfaith Leadership Institute that we host in Chicago in August of every year. And I hope that some of your students consider attending. With people like Joe, we published a number of books and articles on interfaith cooperation. We really, I think, helped to grow a field and a movement and a set of individuals who think of themselves as interfaith leaders. And part of the beauty of having done this work for 20 years is some of those people are now starting their own organizations. And actually they're powerful things like, Jen Bailey and the Faith Matters Network, so you look around and you're like, boy, people who've gone through interfaith work on campuses and some direct IFYC programs, they're institution builders. They have built their own institutions. They've written their own books. They've nurtured their own space. And I think that that's what I'm probably proudest of.
Thank you. Thank you. So to tag on to the question, another staff person asked, what is the place for non-religious people in this vision? How can they feel they belong?
Yeah. So our understanding of interfaith work, our definition is everybody from atheist to Zoroastrian and the various kind of orientations in between. So in Islam, it's Sufis and Salafis, and Christianity, it's people who are Orthodox and people who are Reformed and people who are liberal Christians and people who think of themselves as more conservative Christians. So we begin not with the theological frame. It's not, Abraham unites Muslims, Christians, and Jews. We begin with a civic frame. It's who is present in any given civic space, in a public library or a public school or an athletic league. Who is present? How does their orientation around religion impact their life and their interaction with others? And we need to be able to positively and proactively engage that. So it's a civic frame. The reason that we use the word faith is just, honestly, religion is so marginalized in diversity conversations to begin with, that unless we are gently insistent that it is a topic to be talked about in positive and proactive ways, people will just continue to not talk about it. So we understand that there's, a cost in that it sometimes secular humanists or seekers or atheists or agnostics need to have kind of a bit of an extra invitation from us, which we warmly and immediately do, but we insist that religious identity and diversity is a part of conversations about diversity, for sure, about civil society and about democracy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Taking a little turn here, a question from a faculty in reference to your statement about making change. You encourage people to work on making change rather than just calling for change. When you realized you wanted to become a change maker, what steps did you take to build the skills you personally needed to make that possible?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of what I did was call on the leadership skills I built in student organizations on campus, right? And so, to be really blunt, a lot of the theory I learned in classrooms was in the frame of criticism. And there's usefulness there, but it had, to be really honest, it had its limits when it came to building something. But the experiences that I had leading the Allen Hall volunteer group, being the president of my residence hall, being the president of the honor student council, blah, 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 right? Those were experiences that I called on. And then there were a lot of things that, that I had to learn on the fly. And one of the things, I think amongst the most important things I had to learn was to not jump to criticism everywhere I went. Right? When I was an undergraduate, this may be true. It was true for me. I'm not suggesting it's true for everybody or everywhere, but I got a lot of compliments for the kind of critic that I was. I got A's on papers and I got applause from students and faculty, and that just had it wasn't useful in building something. When you have to hire people and manage people and articulate programs and then execute on those programs and get funding and then let people go, and that's just a whole different skill set. And I don't want to say that it's the only skill set necessary, but I do want to say that if the ultimate goal is building a better order, and a better order is by definition the institutions of a better order, then building those institutions really matters. And the skills to build those institutions really matters.
Oh, thank you so much for that question. Now we have a question from a student. The student says, "This was incredibly powerful, thank you. My question is, what do you do when you feel you're an architect within a larger frameworks that can spoil your work? Not to discredit the work of someone like Moses, who started at the micro and changed the macro, but something like the fact that F&M is situated on land that is stolen. Does one continue to cement F&M, which I believe is an amazing institution, knowing where it lies in a bigger framework?"
Yeah, I find that really powerful. Thank you for that. I find that really, really powerful.
Isn't it?
And I choose to accept some things as they are. I'm not suggesting you have to, but I do. And I build within those frameworks. Maybe you can try to find a patch of land somewhere on earth that's not stolen. It may be harder than you think, right? I think the stealing that went on in what we call the United States of America was especially genocidal, especially oppressive. But I have a hunch, I might be wrong, but I have a hunch that anywhere you go on planet Earth, somebody will say, that is rightfully mine and not theirs.
Thank you. Yeah,
but you can try.
Yeah, that's a good statement. I will let you know that we have a land acknowledgement now done by actually one of our professors, Marianne Levine, and our president, Dr. Barbara Altman. And it's a beautiful statement, but we wound up having basically two statements, one that we do publicly and one that's a bit longer that really has a lot of detail in it. So folks, if you want to read that, it is on the website. So this is a term. This is about K through 12 schools. This is from a staff person. More than 90% of children in the US attend public K through 12 schools. What do you think high schools, colleges, universities can do to inspire our youth, especially marginalized students, to pursue careers in teaching in our public schools?
I think that's a great question. And the older I get, the more I enjoy saying I don't know. When I was, and I don't know about this. I think it's a really interesting and important question. And I think one of the wonderful things about being surrounded by smart, leaned in young people on a college campus is you can say, this is one of the great challenges of our society. Can you figure something out? Can you help us with this? And I think that a challenge like this deserves a lot more reflection than I have given it.
Thank you. That is a big challenge. And the last question that I will ask you from a staff member, and it's a really tough question. How do you find common ground with people who call themselves Christians, Buddhists, or Muslims, but who proclaim ideas and act in ways that are anti-ethical to Christ, Buddha, or Muhammad?
Yeah, I think it's a powerful question. So one of the things I view my role, my work, as engaging positively with people with whom I disagree. Now that has limits, right? I am not buying a brownie from the KKK bake sale, but I'm talking to everybody else. And actually, if I go to bed at night and I've only spoken with people with whom I generally agree about things, it's kind of a lost day. Right? And so we all accord ourselves status for certain things, right? If you run a 6-minute mile, or if you finish a novel, I try to accord myself status for engaging with people with whom I disagree. Now, I am not looking for the people that I find the most wretched, right? Some people do, and I actually admire that. And in fact, Thurgood Marshall would famously meet with segregationists. Read Stephen Carter's piece about him that came out recently. Stephen Carter, the great Yale law professor, he was one of Thurgood Marshall's clerks, and he said, listen, this guy, this lion of the legal civil rights movement, he would meet with segregationists, and I admired that. Well, I admire it too, but I probably couldn't do it, right? But it's a different way of thinking about social change. So if you are doing something, if you're wantonly hurting or killing God's people, which are all people, you're probably not my first phone call. But if there are ways in which we disagree that I want to learn about, I'm leaning in.
Right. Yeah. And we all have to take that time to lean in, even if it's making us uncomfortable. These kind of challenging conversations are amazing. Thank you, Eboo. Thank you so much. And also thank you for the Common Hour Committee and the work that you do. And a special thank you to Joe Pritchett for leaning in with me, because we both had the same idea of bringing you, Eboo Patel, here to our campus. Rachel?
Grateful to be with you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm actually wondering, Dr. Patel, if you have any last thoughts that you want to share in the last minute or so before we have to wrap up our Common Hour.
Yeah, there's a beautiful line from Aimé Césaire. There's room for all of us at the rendezvous of destiny. Right? And that's what James Baldwin realizes at Elijah Muhammad's dinner table that summer night in the early 1960s. I don't want to live in a society where only some people can thrive. I want to live in a society where everybody can thrive, and I have a responsibility to build that. There is room for all of us at the rendezvous of destiny.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being here and sharing this time with us. We appreciate it very much. It is just about 12:30, so I'm afraid from the Common Hour Committee, I must thank you for your time and tell you that we appreciate having you here and hope to take your lessons with us beyond this moment. Thank you, and we'll see everybody next week, 12:30, for Felicia Rose Chavez.